Hello and welcome
Hello,
to
Stuart.
yet another one of Henry Western's Old Mate, the podcast. I am joined this evening by Paul Kennedy over there. Paul is currently head greenkeeper, course manager at Dartford Golf Club. He's been in the turf industry for a long time. Before we hand over to Paul to introduce himself, I'm just going to run through the boring bits. If you could like, rate and review the podcast, that would be fantastic. If you are listening to us through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just scroll down below the list of episodes and it will allow you to leave us a 5-star review and write a written review if you so wish. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and, of course, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget we have a Buy Me a Coffee page set up at www.buymeacoffee.com. If you search HWOM, you'll be able to make a small donation towards the podcast. Our content will always be free. We will never hide it behind any paywalls. But if you want to donate, it all goes to help the future of the podcast. That's all the boring stuff. Mr. Paul Kennedy, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, Stuart. I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, enjoying the warm weather, but now it's turned a bit chilly. So yeah, a bit of a change.
Yeah, we didn't so much have the snow down here. My wife was in Tenterton working today, and they definitely had snow. So I assume it probably came past you as well, did it?
We had a flurry for about 5 minutes, and that was it. There was a few worried faces, and then thankfully it passed. So yeah, luckily, touch wood, I think we'll get away with it. I hope, but
I hope so
know.
too.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the majority of the industry has probably got their holes in the ground. Few people will probably have their seed in the ground, so they don't want these temperatures dropping too much. Seed in the ground, temperatures. We're talking turf, greenkeeping, the golf industry, something that you've been a part of for quite a while. Give us a little introduction to yourself on a personal level, Paul, and then we will get into the meat of the discussion about greenkeeping.
Right. Well, yeah, good to be part of the podcast. Been in greenkeeping since 1992. Came out of school, wanted to do horticulture. So started off with a landscaping firm that sort of run from there. Worked at a research centre, enjoyed that. Then ended up, at Canterbury. From Canterbury, one of the reps came in one day and said, "Oh, there's a small development going on at Sevenoaks. Would you like to come up and have a look?" And we were like, "Yeah, not a problem." Said, "Oh, cheekily, any chance of me bringing my CV along?" So the guy's like, "Yeah, not a problem." And that turned out to be the London Golf Club, which I stayed there from 93 till 98. Left there 98 with in fact, the guy who's in charge of the London Club at the moment, Lee Sayers, and went to Cranbrook after, I think, probably 12 plus years left there. Under, everyone likes to think everything goes nice and rosy, but left under a few sort of heavy clouds. Took a bit of a sabbatical. And then moved back to the London Golf Club in late 2007.
Okay.
So that was interesting. Went there as head greenkeeper. And then 2014, changed roles whilst I was there. So I went from head greenkeeper back to irrigation tech, which was the previous role that I had. And then up until 2021, sort of end to midway through the COVID cycle, left and then went to course manager at Dartford. So yeah, a complete change of sort of situation, and sort of 20 years in total at the London Club. So that became my home for a long time in various roles. And with that you meet a lot of amazing people, and a lot of those people, quite a few I called up with BTME last week, and guys all around the world that I still keep in touch with. So that's me.
Fantastic.
I've got two boys, one of 18 and the other one of 21. So they don't live with me, but they live with their mum. But we have a great relationship, and that adds to the lack of stress in some respects, but also stress in other areas as well. So
I can imagine. I mean, I'm a bit behind you. I've only got one, and she's only 5.5. She acts like she's 21 at times, but Who knows? So why I got in touch with you, really, Paul. Obviously, we've bumped into each other sort of through the industry. I did a bit of irrigation work for a few years down at St George's, and we sat in a Rainbird 2-day course that was held at Ransom's Ipswich. We've sort of bumped into each other at various bigger days, and probably at BTME. I haven't been since 2017, but I'm sure our paths have crossed up there. And I really sort of dropped you a message because I saw a tweet. You just ticked over your 1-year anniversary at Dartford, and you'd sort of mentioned in there that you'd made the decision a year ago to take on a new role. And what caught my eye was sort of the next 2 words were a new lifestyle, and we'll sort of get into that. But that's what we're going to sort of aim to diagnose the lifestyles you may have lived both at work and outside of work. If I suppose a lifestyle is a combination of the two, isn't it? But we're going to look at your journey throughout the industries, the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, and the goods, and potentially a few not so good points. First question, actually, who was your head greenkeeper at Canterbury?
It was Tony Bennett, Anthony Bennett.
I was going to say it was after not quite after the John Millen time.
Yes.
But yes, okay, we'll leave it there. I know a few people who worked with Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
I don't suppose you'll watch this podcast, but
probably won't. But
many stories of Mr. Bennett behind the scenes. We won't.
I'll be totally honest with you. Without him, I wouldn't be where I am now. It's a strange thing to say, because I know he was a bit Marmite to a lot of people, to say the least. But day 2 that I was at Canterbury, he said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to college." I'd only been there a day.
Oh, wow.
I'd gone out with Ron and Fred, who were 2 very old sort of assistant greenkeepers, rake bunkers, got back to the yard, and Tony turned around to me and went, "Oh, by the way, you're going to Plumpton tomorrow." And that's where it kicked off.
Oh, wow.
And it was good for me, because I needed that little bit of push. I was still young at the time, and that was the that was the start of the career, to be honest.
Was my old mate Mick Garrett there, or was he a bit after that?
Oh, I think he was probably a bit after that, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I was at Canterbury. I survived 10 months under Jason Moody in 2001, but I say survived. He may say he survived me, because I'd just returned from a few months in Australia, partying it up, and I didn't change much when I got back to the greenkeeping industry. I have to be honest, probably not the highlight of my career, that spell at Canterbury. So let's get into your sort of time at the London Club. You started there, so you went to the London Club 93 to 98. So that would have been the build and the growing, would it, Paul?
That's it. That's exactly it. So the International was near on being built. The bunkers still did have, the majority of the bunkers had no sanding. Still a lot of growing phases. A lot of areas still hadn't properly seeded. The Heritage was still in the phase of having greens constructed, tees constructed. Up until, we had a soft opening, I think, in September. I'm sure it was late September 93, and then in 94 we had the grand opening. And we just got that through on the skin of our teeth, to be totally honest, because we'd had a lot of heavy rain through the winter time, and we were dealing with trying to grow, good grasses in British climate, and it was a baptism of fire. I'll probably use that quite a bit tonight, because I think that as a youngster going into the industry, running or going to college, and then having a Nicholas course to be part of, it was an interesting time. It was an area of work that I loved, getting stuck in, doing a bit of everything, seeing the growing, talking to the contractors, talking to the various, construction engineers, talking to the guys on the irrigation side, a little bit of everything, to be honest. And then
project would have probably been like the forebearer to future designs like the Grove, and sort of huge big projects. The London Club for the Southeast was new and almost unheard of for years in the industry, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think when you look down, there was a chart of, I think the Times did it, of how many golf courses had opened in the last couple of years or were going to open. I think it was East Sussex National ourselves. I think Chart Hills, I believe, as well, was one of the others.
Faldo Design, yeah.
Yeah, I think Loch Lomond, maybe Loch Lomond, I'm not sure. I think there was a few around at the time, but certainly for Kent, it was probably one of the biggest projects that they'd taken on. I think Moatlands, I believe. Now Moatlands is no longer, but
no, it's gone.
you know, that was another one back then that was heavily invested. So you know, it stood the test of time. It really has. So,
and not too much has come since, to be honest, really, has it? No. On that scale, in certainly in Kent.
No, it hasn't. No.
So talk us through irrigation and your time there. You're sort of senior irrigation technician. Was it all? I'm not going to put myself in your bracket, but I've had the pleasure of looking after an aging irrigation system over the course of 2 or 3 seasons. It's lonely work. It can be wet, cold work. It's thankless work, to be honest. Let's be honest. That, you know, an irrigation system, when it's working well, nobody knows it's there. Nobody cares it's there. No. An irrigation system that isn't working well, everyone wants to moan about it, and everyone can see exactly where it's gone wrong. Because you tend to have either water pissing up at 8 blooming bar out of the ground, or just massive puddles everywhere,
or nothing at all.
Yeah. Or a particularly dry patch of green back left when you should have it, when you've got a nice shiny sprinkler there that should be working. So talk us through those early years at London Club, Paul. Maybe you could mention sort of some of the ups, some of the downs. You were probably learning that position as irrigation tech as well.
Yeah. Well, I came on. Yeah, I was at college. I was in my last year of college. I sort of took on board sort of any task that was given to me. I was always interested to get stuck in. So whether it was, with Mr. Todd, constructing Peter, constructing bunker bases. Whether it was lowering irrigation heads, it was helping move the 10,000 sandbags that we had around the golf course, to one of the points where I really did get stuck in with a guy called Colin Sainsbury and his time deputy called Adrian Hanbury. And it was a case of making sure that the fairways and the rough areas were watered. So I had traveller sprinklers. That was my job. So I was literally spending all day, literally for 12 hours, setting up sprinklers, moving back round, doing the same thing again, and then kind of got the love for the industry, and that's kind of that side of it outside of greenkeeping. So plus sides, it's a once in a lifetime to see a project like that built, especially in your home county.
Yeah.
The downside, the hours, that was something that when you look back on it, you think, you're mad, working 21 days on the trot, 7 days a week. When you look back at it now, you're thinking, wow, how did I have the stamina to even, to do that? As you say, you were going out, you're enjoying yourself outside, you were spending your overtime,
Yeah.
But there's lots of good sides. Say the camaraderie of the staff, meeting guys, and you're still friends with those guys now. You've got Andy Wood over in Australia or New Zealand. You've got obviously Peter Todd. You've got Lee. There's a whole array of guys that you meet, and you're still in contact with them now.
Yeah.
As you say, the downside is. I don't know. There's many downsides, I think, but there's also more the majority of up. But it's difficult to look back at it now because you think, oh yeah, I was young and I could just attempt everything. But I didn't have a family, and at the same time I was living back in Canterbury and I was traveling there every day for that time. So I had to contemplate an hour's journey each way every day. So there was that commitment,
Let's be thankful we're not dealing with today's fuel prices, Paul.
Exactly. I'd have a tent on site. So
So fantastic. Like you mentioned, you weren't sort of a father at the time then. So it does make things a bit easier, all those long hours. And back then, possibly still the same now, that was a construction or a growing, that was expected. You know, I've when I took a role in the Czech Republic, was out there for just over a year, and I arrived on site sort of towards the end of the growing. We had sort of 90% coverage on greens, 60 to 70% coverage on fairways. But the German boys who were there, they were there for the first 3 months that I was on site. They were finishing off the growing, a German company called Sommerfeld. And they were doing 21 days on, 2 days off. And that was their work pattern. But it was, those 21 days were a full 10 to 12 hour days.
Yeah.
And during the year, during the winter, they'd been on the same schedule, and they'd just been working sun up till sundown in the winter. And it's good for the money, it's good for the bank account, but it's not, and it's good for your CV, but it puts strains on, but it is necessary. I'm not going to say don't go and do it. It is necessary. You know, golf course growings are on time restraints, aren't they, and financial restraints.
I think personally, you know, I tried to have, even at a young age, a bit of a plan of what I actually wanted to do. You know, Andy came up to me one day and said, you know, very early on, what do you want to be in your life, your career? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I said, well, I'd like to have your position. And he said, right. He said, then this is the direction that you need to take. So, you know, financially, I was doubling my salary every year with overtime.
Wow.
You know, you were putting the hours in. You know, so that just banked, you know, that's where the house come from, you know. So you don't get an opportunity like that now. And I think lifestyles have changed. You know, people, you know, you see all the construction projects going on from scratch, and then you think to yourself, well, you know, that takes a lot of someone's life away to, you know, to do those. You know, as you say, we were working the same shift, sort of 21 days on the trot, couple of days off, and then back on again. But it's, you know, for me, it's one of those ones that you're either going to do it or you're not. Simple as. You know, a lot of people would probably work there for a month and go, I can't do that, and go away. You know, but as I say, times have changed. Would I do it again? Maybe, maybe not. You know, my two boys have grown up now, so you know the time away from them isn't so crucial because they've got their own life. But you know, for me, it would be a hell of a commitment to, you know, to invest that sort of time again, you know, and I take my hats off to guys who do it on a regular basis, you know. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting part in your life.
Yeah, and I know sort of where I am down at St George's. Obviously, we had the Open last year, and me with she would have been 4 at the time, my daughter, and my wife taking a sort of job returning to the office where she had been working from home. And sort of the standard 8-hour day becomes a standard 10-hour day, really, in the build up to a tournament. And really, those standard 10-hour days push to 12-hour days quite regularly. And it is blooming hard work when you've got, or when you do it regularly and you've got childcare and stuff. But that's, you know, that's the same for a lot of jobs. And fortunately, you know, my boss was sort of very good in allowing us to sort of work around commitments. And I think most people are, but it's things that people don't consider within the turf industry. There is you know, it is unsociable hours. It's a lot of weekend work, but it's the build up to, we've all got Easter coming up where everyone's on the back of renovations. And now we go into Easter. Golf clubs are probably still on catch up a bit from COVID. It's manic. We talk, you know, this golf boom is still occurring. Let's move on a bit from that sort of initial spell, Paul, because I just want to pick your brains if you don't mind. You sort of moved to Cranbrook after that. That was as head greenkeeper stroke course manager position, was it?
So I moved from Lee. I moved with Lee. Lee was my course manager at the time. He left, and then I took on the role as course manager, and I stayed there for a good considerable amount of years. And whilst I was there, we took on another golf course in Oxford called Rye Hill. So 2 completely ends of the scale. One was a modern design, I think actually it sits on the borderline with Tad Martin Heath. So you had literally a traditional golf course one side, and then this kind of USGA type golf course on the other. So that was an interesting development, trying to run two completely different golf courses at such a distance. So that did take up a considerable amount of time towards the end. And you know, the owners weren't the easiest of people to work with.
Okay.
But you know, at the end of the day, you know, you get your head down, you get stuck in. I had commitments. I had, you know, a house, so I couldn't sort of just turn around and go, yeah, you know, I'm going to go and work somewhere else, because things like that aren't easy to find. But you know, I stuck with it. You know, we brought in the drill and fill machine. So you know, we sort of used that a considerable amount. So it was new technology to me, the use of zeolites, the use of new products. So you know, I was on my own learning curve there, because I was taking sort of the bull by the horns and going, well, I'm going to try that, you know. And you know, to a point, you learn a certain amount at the big clubs, but obviously you don't have the budget and you don't have the resources. So when you come to a smaller club like that, you've got to try to adapt your situation to deal with a mower that's 15 years old and blowing diesel, you know. And yeah, it is, you know, and you know, no transportation, so you have to hand walk the mower around 18 holes, you know. So but you know, yeah, I enjoyed myself there, and I think looking back on it, you learn from your mistakes, and they stay with you to today. So yeah, it was great. You know, the hiring of staff. You know, we had you know, we hired a disabled lad called Craig, who had mild cerebral palsy. So that was a challenge straight away. You know, it was an interesting challenge. Glad I took it. No one else had given him a chance, and I was always willing to give him that little bit of an extra mile. It had challenges along the way. Let's put it that way. But yeah, you know, it was an interesting decade plus that I spent there. So yeah, you know, things, as you say, things change. Things had changed in my life towards the end of that. So I think there was a combination of a few, certainly a few aspects of my life and my job that sort of clashed with each other. And but you know, that's one of those things. You know, these things happen. You know, well, you can't do anything about it. Let's be honest.
Yeah, if we could sort of touch on that. I mean, obviously your role at the London club prior to this was pretty senior and pretty full on. You know, you've talked about the, you know, the build, the growing, running those sort of traveling sprinklers for 12 hours. Then you move on and take a sort of a course manager position. We all know that a golf course, you know, it's always growing, it's always moving, it's always evolving when the staff aren't there. And as head man, you take that full responsibility on. And I can imagine if you're not careful, it's very, very hard to separate that golf course from the time at home. You know, you mentioned you've got two boys. I don't want to delve into that sort of your marriage, but how much did you struggle, or didn't you struggle with separating and work? I don't want to use that. I've done a podcast recently about work-life balance. I don't particularly want to get into that too much, but were you able to finish a long day at the golf club, put the keys in the ignition, drive home, and just be dad and be Paul, or was the fescue, was the poem growing in your ears as you were at home?
I to a point it was. I think my boss at the time, or the owner, wasn't the easiest guy to get on with. So you'd be sitting there on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd get a phone call and he'd expect you to be there in 15 minutes. And you would get there, and he was worried about a small dry patch on the back of the 9th green, thinking something had happened. And you're like, right, reassure him. You would disappear back home. Monday afternoon, you know, he would phone you at 5 o'clock in the morning, or he'd phone you any time throughout the day. You just, it was, I could personally take that break away from work
Yeah.
And then that constant phoning, and I understand that, you take that role on, but he wouldn't, it was almost wouldn't take no for an answer. So,
Right.
you'd be sitting, oh, by the way, we're going out today. Okay, fine. Just as you're walking out the door, the phone rings. You're like, right, okay. You disappear up there, you couldn't relax. You were literally just like on a hot tin roof all the time. So it was a very difficult situation. And, it grew and grew and grew and grew to the point where obviously, we had come to, I wouldn't say to clashes, but we were going in two separate paths. So,
understandable.
And at that time, I don't mind, talking about the relationship side, because of that and for other factors as well, things weren't going really according to plan. So, when it all came to a head, it all came to a head all at the same time within a couple of months of each other. So
Okay.
it was a case of like, right, fresh start. But I think the London club, coming back from that, I was going home, and I was even after all of that time, I think, I was going back home, I was going on holiday, I wasn't thinking about the club at all. And I think when you take on your own venue, I think you do have that commitment to to subconsciously be thinking about it all the time, because you're thinking, God, as a youngster, I say a youngster, I'm 48 now, but when I was in my 20s, you're always thinking like, oh, because you think that your job's on the line all the time, and I must be making that extra effort to try to keep it, ticking over. But yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult.
And I think anyone who takes a head greenkeeping job on, I mean, I think even if it's subconsciously, it must be. I've never done that. I've never been in charge, had my own venue, but I could imagine it's almost impossible to not go home and think about it. I mean, it's very easy for me, and to do in my role now. I can come home, I have half an hour to myself. I go and pick my daughter up from school, and then that's me until my wife comes in at sort of 6 o'clock. So I'm dad for 2.5 hours, and then I'm husband for an hour and a half, and the telly goes on, or I do a podcast, and work is nowhere. But if I was trying to fit all this in, even in a deputy role, I would have my boss texting me, I'm sure. And I don't know if I could do that. I'm sure it would be things like this that would prove impossible. So that is part of the job, and it's only natural. And I think probably most people would say to be a proper or a good head greenkeeper, you really need to take a certain amount of it home with you, to be good and passionate about what you do. You mentioned then the London club again. You went back to the London club after your time managing the two golf clubs.
Yeah.
You went back to take on that irrigation role again, a slightly older system when you returned, but you would have sort of gone into a bigger crew. Was Mr. Todd would have been head man then when you returned?
He was. So Peter, when I left, he was I think he was first assistant deputy head, I believe, when I left. When I returned in 2008, he was obviously course manager. Glenn was his deputy. And you say I turned there, what was that, late 2007, and came on and offered the job as head greenkeeper there. And then you say then in 2014 was offered the irrigation tech's job again. So it was a for me, it was almost like a job within a job. It was like a new job. So it was a, same site, different role. Great, something different. But yeah, there was a lot involved. The system, the staff had changed. We had gone from probably 50 members of staff down to, including mechanics, sort of the secretary in the office had probably gone down to, I don't know, 26 to 28.
Oh, considerably less then.
Yeah,
there's me saying less, probably a bigger team, but actually less.
Yeah, it was considerably less. I think because going back into the 90s, money was very readily available. It was funded by the Japanese. Were they worried about making a loss or a profit? It was difficult. We weren't sort of, privy to that sort of information. But, when you turn back up the golf course had been changed. The golf course had been sold on. So
Okay.
it was then owned by the Bendinat Group. And they were running it as a business. You know, they wanted to see figures at the end of the end of the year that were profitable. So the whole concept of you know, how the golf course was perceived, you know, with the hundreds of bunkers that it had, a limited amount of manpower, you know, things were having to sort of be moved into line to cope with those sort of financial changes. So you know, some of our bunkers, as you know, like on the 11th International, probably took 200 tons of sand to fill one bunker. You know, we needed to make things like that more manageable and smaller. So, you know, you could have coped with a 50-man team, but now almost reducing that to half, you know, and a budget that was probably less than what we originally started with. So, yeah, it was an interesting change back, let's be honest. And then walked straight into the door to the 2008 European Open, which was held over on the opposite course on the Heritage. So, you know, it was literally all hands on deck, you know, trying to learn your own golf course, and then, you know, assisting Glenn, you know, trying to run one golf course, and then also trying to assist Glenn with my staff as well to, you know, to produce, you know, the European Open. So
wow,
yeah, it was different.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned something you just mentioned, bunkering, and you know, somewhere, of course, Charter Hills that you mentioned sort of at the start of this podcast. I know that's obviously the McGurks from Princes have taken on Charter Hills, and that sort of faldo design bunkering that Charter Hills experienced, you know, that's caused them. I think it's reasonably well known within the industry that they became unmanageable for the sort of staff that they had towards the end of the previous ownership. And it's just ways that the industry.
It's a huge costing. It's a huge costing bunkering, you know, and now that we're looking at, you know, the cost of sand, the cost of haulage, the cost of fuel, you know, to try to get sand. You know, I can remember when sand was £22 a ton. You know, I've just bought in 120 tons at £44 a ton. You know,
100% increase.
And it's only going one way. Let's be honest, you know. So, you know, and that's, you know, it's like everything else. You know, you've got to pay your staff more. You got to, you know, you got to find the money from somewhere. You know, and you're being asked to save money, but everything going the wrong way. So
yeah, it's crazy. And we just have to applaud every sort of person in your position out there who is. I mean, it's probably the same in many industries around the world, but managers are being asked to still produce. Well, they're being asked to produce more for less year on year, and certainly within the golf course industry, the membership expectations only go one way. They always go up, as you say. The cost of things are going up, and probably courses are cutting back on staff. Your budget doesn't increase in line with the cost of sand and fuel going up, does it? So we have to just say well done to everyone on that.
I agree. You know, I think it's the cost of living. You know, my guys, you know, the cost of living's gone up. Everything. It's just everything's come at once. You know, heating for their house. You know, the fuel's gone up. You know, membership subs don't always go up, you know, because the people are like, well, we can't afford that. Well, we've got to be able to pay for something, you know, but they want that standard increased, you know, and you've got to try to find, you know, ingenious ways of coming up with, you know, a better product for almost less money now, you know, or the same money.
I think that's exactly it, Paul. And if I cast my mind back to 2018 and that ridiculously warm summer, that even us down at St George's, people will probably think of Royal St George's and they'll think sort of a bottomless pit of money. It's not quite that simple. And the damage isn't the right word, but the struggle we had maintaining sort of grass coverage on fairways and semi-rough, it was then a 12-month project to get that back on board. And people quite rightly do want to know why this has occurred. You know, you've got a brand new irrigation system in the ground. Some things are beyond our control. We could do everything. We try and do everything, and sometimes Mother Nature's just a bit too much for you.
Well, it is, and I quite agree. You know, we are dealing, you know, when I was looking through, you know, the notes that you had sent through, you know, I was sitting there and I just thought to myself, it doesn't matter what we do, Mother Nature's going to win. It's going to either serve us a good hand or a poor hand. You know, you've got to look at sawgrass this last month, you know, and the rain that they had there, you know, and everyone's going, oh yeah, you know, they perceive that as a dry course. They didn't expect that deluge of weather, or no one did. And I think, what did they have, 182, 183 staff?
Yeah, it was beyond the highest dart score. I know that much.
You know, but back in that 2017-18 period, I think we almost ran out of water. I think I had 500 cubic meters out of a 100,000 cubic reservoir,
and that's about one. That's what, one fairway application or something.
Well, it is, yeah, pretty much. That's it.
Not
That's
much
exactly
at all.
it. You know, we were having to reduce. You know, the members were obviously wanting to see the course in great condition. You know, the guys were doing a superb job by presenting the surfaces. We had to go down the, you know, the policy of, right, you can only have greens on. Hand watering takes priority. Fairways goes on once every 14 days.
Yeah.
So everything was starting to turn, and you know, we were the last case scenario would be to drop water out of the, what I would call the ornamental lakes, because you know, you're trying to protect the liner from damage and sun UV rays. So it's it was a difficult time, you know. And then I spoke to, you know, I went down and saw Paul, and you know, it was like, yeah, you know, it's a struggle that we're part of as well. And you're thinking, you step back and you went, oh, what, really? Royal St George's, you know, they have these issues.
we just put sort of over £1 million worth of brand new Toro stuff. Sorry to mention Toro there.
No.
Toro stuff under the ground. Let's move forward a bit. Let's go. We don't want to go straight to your new role, but towards the end of your time at the London club, it's probably fair to suggest that you were, I think we all were having struggles as COVID struck, and you took a bit of time to consider your position, not just in the industry, but sort of in the world, and whether you were happy doing what you're doing. Are you happy to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, no, not a problem at all, Stuart. Yeah, I think COVID gave a lot of people, I know we chatted just briefly on text about it, that I think it gave COVID a lot of people a lot of time to sit back, because they were at home on their own. Nothing was going anywhere. I actually, along with I think 8 other crew, were keeping the golf course ticking over. So, you know, COVID never really happened to me. So I was always on that tick over. But the time that I did have, because nothing else was going on, when you did get home, you sat down because you couldn't physically do anything. And then you couldn't go out anywhere. So you were sitting there and you were like, wow, you know, what the hell am I doing with my life? You know, where am I going? And I think because you're so busy on a day-to-day basis, you don't get a chance to reflect on anything. You know, and I had a great crew to work with. You know, Lee had just come on board. We were, you know, getting along great. You know, we'd made some massive changes to the system. So, but for me, there was something not quite right. And I sat there, you know, and I was like, I just couldn't quite work it out. You know, and then I sat down one day and was just like, well, hang on a second. You know, my 2 boys have grown up. You know, they've sort of got jobs, girlfriends, so they were less dependent on me. You know, the COVID had happened, so you know, I was sat there on my own for a lot longer, and I just felt that I wasn't. I don't know. It was quite a sticky point, I'll be honest, because I didn't quite know whether I was bored of the industry, if that's probably the correct thing to say, or I'd fallen out. I think I'd fallen out of love with it. You know, I'd done European tour events, not only at the club but elsewhere. We'd had, you know, the Volvo World Match Play. You know,
underwater,
yeah. You know, we'd you know, I'd help sort of bring the irrigation system up to. I think it had just come to that point where I think everything had sort of, all the ducks were in line. Like, you know, the irrigation system, I'd done as much as I could possibly do up to that point.
Yeah.
And I was probably scratching my head thinking, well, what do I do next? You know, and yeah, you know, I'll be totally honest. I even thought of working at B&Q, you know, because I thought to myself, do I want to go through another year of all that stress, all of the breakages, all of the, you know, the issues with you know, lack of water, you know, having to worry about that, having to worry about all of these different items, you know, and then, as you say, being able to switch off when you get home, you know, and because I was still living in Ashford at the time, you know, I was still traveling up and down the motorway every day.
Yeah.
You know, Operation Brock was in place as well.
Oh,
So
yeah.
my hour's journey turned sometimes into a 3-hour journey home. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't the best of times, but you know, going back to Lee was very supportive. Lee would always come in and pop his head around the corner and went, "Everything okay?" You know, he could tell you'd had a pretty crap day,
Yeah.
but he was just there just to make like, "Is everything okay?" And even with all of that, there was still something that was ticking away, saying, "I need to do something different. I need to refresh myself," and that was a serious consideration about getting out of the industry.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll be honest now, and thankfully I stayed in it because, you know, I made the right choice. But at that time, when I think you've got too much time on your hands, I think you overthink things, and
Yeah.
you know, you can see well, you can, for me, you can only see one way out, because you're literally like, I need to get out of this, you know, I can't cope with this anymore. And I think the worst thing is being on your own, sitting there mulling it over each day just makes things 10 times worse. So but yeah, you know, and here I am now, a month and 1 day, a year and 1 month, on the other side of it.
Well,
So
let's get to that then. Yeah, because that's where this sort of chat came about. I picked up on your tweet, the change of role, change of lifestyle, change of venue, I think were your words. So we know the change of role was you became course manager, the change of venue. You're now at Dartford Golf Club, and we'll talk about the lifestyle change a bit later. But talk to us a bit about Dartford. So you've taken it on. You've been through the interview process. Talk to me about that sort of first day, that first week in the role. Eye-opening, getting to know the guys. I don't want you to delve too much into personalities, but talk to us about that initial. Was there, oh, holy shit, what have I done? Or was it really, yes, I've made the right choice, or a bit of both potentially?
I think when you say holy shit, I think that's probably an understatement, because I kept my hand in at the London club. So I always, you know, be for tournament support, cutting greens, helping out on I loved it. You know, I loved having that change of role. But to have done irrigation since 2014, what you think you still know, you don't. Instead, it's very simple to that, you know.
Well, that's very honest of you as well, Paul.
But it's true. But it's true, because you're on a completely different playing field. You know, you're looking at a system, not the grass as such. Chemicals change, as we know.
Yeah.
You know,
well, they take a lot of them away,
and that's it. So I was going in with all of this old technology in my head. You know, you got the carbendazim. You know, you had, you know, what was, you know, Rovril, you know, you had all of the different active ingredients coming off the market. So the attitude, the reading up, and the literature I was reading going in there was an eye opener. But I'd gone in there probably once a week for a month. I never met a couple of the guys, but nothing more than sort of just to say hello. Just wanted to get a general feel of the course, sort of putting out sort of feelers, talking to the reps, getting reps involved, asking what had gone on in the past. And then, so day one turns up. I turn up there, used to this sparkling compound that you walk in, clocking in machine, etc., etc. To walk in and find, you know, a table on 3 legs, my desk, everything sliding off to one side, and you know, it was a baptism of fire, I think would be the key word. But day one, we literally walked straight in there and started coring greens. So we did a full renovation the first day we were there. So it was a great icebreaker for the guys. So we'd taken on 3 extra staff as well since I was on board. So in the month going up to that, we'd employed, you know, 3 extra guys, including an apprentice. 2 of the guys, one guy had been there 17 years, the other guy had been there 30 years. So there was a wealth of knowledge. There was an attitude there of, you know, new guy coming in, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? You know, And I was really open with them. I'm the same every day. So, you know, I'm black and white. So I just went in there and said, right, this is it. This is me. This is how it's going to go.
Yeah.
You take on board their you know, their life story as such within the time that you've got there. And you try to make best of that day. But at the end of the first day, I came home, and going back to what we said about, you know, did I make the right decision? I sat back, and when I got home, and I said to the better half, I was like, not quite sure this is the right move, you know, because it was such a culture shock. It was such a shock. And then, you know, time progressed. You know, the first week I was just like, wow, I've never been this knackered in my life, you know. And someone turned around and went, well, that's actually because you've actually worked for a change, Paul, you know. And I was like, oh, thanks, guys, you know. But no, you know, it was an interesting week, and I think you call on an experience. So, you know, some interesting articles that went out the other day. People were saying, you know, Twitter's a wonderful place, you know, saying what would you have more experience over qualifications? And people were quite open and say, well, you know, I'd have qualifications over experience. A lot of people going, I'd have experience over qualifications. You know, my experience and qualifications, I would say, because obviously I'd been out the industry for that period of time, you know, the experience was cutting in, you know, knowing what to do in the situations,
Yeah.
you know, and that proved a useful tool. So to give you a rough insight, the Greens had no renovation for 6 years.
Wow.
Not even a wetting agent. So
and you still called them greens?
Well, there was grass on them. Yes,
And you cut it short.
That was yeah, exactly. You know, there was I don't know 40 to 50% grass on fairways.
Mm-hmm.
It was yeah, as I say, it was a baptism of fire when you actually and the more and more I went on week after week after week, I was like, you know, all of these little hidden extras kept popping up, and I'm like, wow, you know. And I think through experience, and because it was sort of a new venture to me, you kind of sort of, I don't know, you sort of smoothed over these areas because you didn't see them because you were new to them. So it was sort of, I had a blank canvas. So for me, they were employing me. It's the first time they'd employed anyone outside the club in 70 years.
Right.
So there was great expectations, let's put it that way. So there was a lot of pressure, but in a different way. And I actually sat down with myself and went after that first week, and I thought, I'm going to take the bull by the horns. And that's one of the things that I've tended to go through my whole career of, like, I was told, if you're going to do something, you're going to do it flat out. Don't take it half, you know, don't take it in half measures. And I've done that. And I sat back and I went, well, actually, I've achieved this week what I wanted to actually achieve, you know. And then each week I set myself weekly goals. And then I sat back and then I kept looking at the weekly goals and ticking them off, going, well, I've achieved this, this, and this, but I haven't achieved this, this, and this. And prioritizing those, you know, the methods I was doing, bits and pieces, you know, I was, you know, I may have called greens this way in the past. I may have sprayed this in the past this way, but I was willing to look at, you know, new technologies and listen to the guys who had been doing that job since, you know, for 30 years on that site. And you sort of, well, why am I taking the stress? Why don't these other guys sort of lend their opinion? So it was an open discussion, so which made the change that little bit easier, to be honest, for me.
Yeah, so you've taken on 3 new guys, and you've gone in there yourself. So you sort of 50% of the team is not necessarily your team, but new. But the existing staff members, they've bought into the change. Is change of direction is that the right phrase?
Yeah, I think it is. I think soon after I started, the general manager changed.
Okay.
That was a big thing because the guy's attitude changed straight after that. And I was like, well, that's a bit strange because I didn't really know him. You know, you can't get to know someone in 2 months. So the GM changed. We had a new GM. So there was a bit of an interim period between the 3 months sort of changeover. And the guy's attitude changed almost instantaneously. The stress levels disappeared. And I was thinking, and there was a whole different aura around the guys when you sat down with them.
Yeah.
So there was obviously something, and as you say, I don't know what went there in the past. I had no real interest. All I was interested in was for the grass, simple as. And that's what I've been employed to do. So I didn't get involved in the politics. But, you know, Rob, who'd been there 30 years, lovely guy. He's what, 6'9", I think he is. So, you know, he's like, but he's a gentle giant. And
he does all the tree work, does he?
He does, yeah.
Terrible joke, sorry.
I know. But you should see him on a mower. He's quite funny. You know, his knees are up round his ears. But no, he was a real lifeline to have there. And I said to him, you know, funny enough, one of the chairman of Greens came down and said to him, how's things going, Rob? How's things going? And Rob is Rob. Rob will say things exactly as. And he went, it's like a new day at work for me. He goes, I'm learning all of these new things, all of these new techniques. He goes, different ways. And he thoroughly took it on board. You know, it was it was great to hear. The other guys, they were a little bit more sort of like cagey, and one of them's still trying to open up a little bit now, because he's great. He's a great worker. You know, you could never fault anything that he does, but he's always got that, you know, he's got that suspicious eye to him, if that makes sense, you know, and that's good, you know, to be cautious. Not everyone's going to be the same, but everyone has bought into it, you know, and they can see that the last year has changed, and, you know, the way that we treat machinery, the way the methodology out on the golf course, the communication is a key thing now.
Massive.
Oh, it is huge, because there was never any communication between the clubhouse. That's an old adage, where the greenkeepers and the clubhouse were completely two separate entities.
People listening to this will have to listen to something I recorded last night with Ricky Willison at Ealing. We recorded a wonderful chat on communication, actually, between exactly that. Ricky as director of golf, and the green staff headed up by Wes now there, and obviously Mr. Greg Evans still has a huge input. But getting back to our chat, not going on about communication, Paul. Massive.
It's key,
vital on a daily basis, and even more so if you can micromanage that daily into a couple of important chats along the way during that day. You can't, you know.
Well, WhatsApp. WhatsApp and Twitter. I've come off of Instagram. I come off of Facebook. It was just one of those distractions. So Twitter is huge. You know, I've got back onto Twitter, and you learn a huge amount off of Twitter. You know, and you pick the wheat from the chaff. Let's be honest. You know, it's an interesting social media platform. WhatsApp. You know, I've got a WhatsApp group with my guys. I've got a WhatsApp group with my chairman and with my chairman of Greens. So if there are any questions, they're in direct contact with the members. So if any members are going, why has this not been done? And they ask me, and I can answer them there and then straight away. And that's good. But they've both got families. They're both elected members of the board. So this is not their full-time job. So they've got outside interests as well as what they do at the golf club. So they understand the stresses and the strains of family life, as well as what needs to be done at the club. So, you know, we've got a great group of managers and, you know, clubhouse staff and the board. And communication from my point of view and their point of view is key, you know, and sometimes I think initially they were a little bit sort of worried, like, oh God, you know, do we talk to Paul? And I opened the communication up, because there's a great app called V1, which allows me full access to all the members. So I can update the club website. I can talk to all of the members by email. So I send a general email out. I let them know what's going on a month in advance, which I've got to do tonight, to tell them really our season starts May the 1st as such. So I want to tell them what we've got planned to do, where we are, post renovation, etc. And it's an easy platform. So you then go out to all of your members. And I actually put a forum together. I said to the guys, I said, look, you know, I'm willing to do a question and answer session. We'll make some money at the club, go, you know, have a night where they could ask me anything, you know.
Very brave.
Yeah, we would pick 5 questions, and if there was more, you know, we would run another session. No one replied. I'm like, okay. So I checked again. I was just like, yeah, the email address is wrong, you know. So either that or they just don't like me. I don't know, Stu, really.
I'd be amazed if you don't get any questions, Paul. I'll be honest.
But I think the problem is because we were open with the communication right from the word go, we were answering a lot of their questions before they'd even been asked. So, you know, they were wondering what's going on with the bunkers. Why have the bunkers got no sand in them? It was being answered. So the up to date, I'm not going to just send an update for the sake of an update. If there's something that I know that's going to be changed, whether it be the new rulings on drop zones or whatever it may be, they're going to get an update straight away. And then I think that communication between the GM saying, you know, it's the 125th anniversary this year, you know, we need a new design of flag. You do that. We'll keep it a bit sort of under the radar until we're ready to announce it. And then we can go on with that. New pins, you know, new hole cuts, new, you know, whatever it may be. You know, we've got lots of things in our sleeve, but to be able to have that line of open communication, I think, whether it be from the clubhouse or to the members direct, I said is huge, and it's made my job. I'm not saying I don't get criticised, and I'm not sure, you know, it's not the perfect world, but it's certainly very it's very different to what I would have expected a members golf club to be, because speaking to guys up there, guys are like, yeah, you got 600 greenkeepers on the crew, you know, and a lot of places are like that, but these guys are very, very complimentary, you know, and I have stand up, you know, confrontations with some of the members because they're passionate. They want to know what's going on, and they want to know why this has changed. You know, we didn't have temporary greens for the whole of this year because that just wasn't in my remit to have. And one of the lady members came up to me and she goes, why haven't we got temporary greens? And I said, well, you can have them if you want. I said, I'm quite happy to give you them. I said, but that's not under my remit to do that. I want to try to get away from that process. Well, we've never had that before. So, you know, it's a big change for them, and it's a big change for me as well. So
but one that you seem to be, and I think I'll go back to that word, that clear line of communication will enable and facilitate those relationships to develop. And the worst thing that can happen is those lines of communication breaking down and you talking through third parties, emails being sent via a general manager, forwarded on to you 3 weeks after he's received them, and they've been discussed in the bar and potentially at a committee meeting that you might not have been involved in. But it sounds to me, Paul, like you're making fantastic progress there. Let's go on to the last bit of the tweet. Let's sort of finish on the last bit of the tweet. You mentioned simply the word lifestyle. We've heard about your lifestyle sort of up to taking this job, and a lot of it was work. Probably drove you to the decision that you made. You know, you talked about potentially leaving the industry. I think myself and us in the industry are thankful that you didn't, Paul. So the lifestyle that you wanted to change, I know you're big into your sports. I know you love your cycling, and I think you're one of these mad people who does a bit of open water swimming as well. Can't get my head around that. I never will. I
think it's irrigation for too many years. That's what's done it.
So just tell me, when you took this role on it, because I put in my notes to you that I couldn't see a lifestyle change taking on a head greenkeeping role. To me, that's like you've jumped out of a very hot frying pan. You've jumped into an even hotter oven, potentially, in my view. But so what lifestyle changes were you seeking? Your boys are grown up. So were you seeking a bit more time in the saddle, a bit more time in the water? Or were you thinking or was it more of a mindset that you were hoping to change?
I think a bit of both. I'll be totally honest. I'd almost given up cycling. You know, Lee at the London club I used to cycle with. He went into mountain biking because he just thought going on the road was too dangerous. I was still racing. I was doing silly miles. And then that sort of gradually started to get less and less and less. You know, that could have been down to, you know, whether it be COVID or just me becoming tired and fatigued through work. I think there was a variation of sort of issues there. And then sort of the lifestyle I think it all sort of, as you said, it all came at once. It was a case of like, you know, I reassessed. I had that chance to reassess what I wanted to do. And I think up until last August, when I came back off of holiday, I then realised coming back off of holiday, I'd made the right decision. I'd been 6 months into the job. I had taken my first holiday in the summer that for, I don't know, 10 years, 14 years, probably more than that. That's one of those things, you know, you tend to bury your head in the sand, right? I can't go away through the summer because I'm needed, you know. No, you're not, you know, you're not needed, you know, it's what you think in your head. Yeah, I you know, I came back for holiday, walked out onto one of the greens. There wasn't a it wasn't in great condition, and I just realized then I had that passion to turn things back to how I wanted them, and it just clicked. Literally the day of my return, it clicked in my head that yeah, that was the right decision that I had made. You know, I'd had the right lifestyle. I wasn't getting stressed by it. I was using my experience, my knowledge. You know, people were calling, you know, and just saying, oh, you know, everything all right, Paul, you know, throughout that period of time. That was always good to have that, to understand that you had support there, I think, as well. You know, I'd go up to the guys back at the London club, and you know, if they had any small issues, obviously, you know, I told them that I wouldn't just leave them to you know, to a large system. You know, Lee would come down and visit, you know, and it was having that contact, I think, and knowing that there's always someone to talk to. I think was key, and something I'd probably I'd sort of steered away from. You know, men being men, we don't like to talk about things.
I've done a 16-part podcast series on men not talking.
And honestly, and you know, lockdown affected my youngest quite a bit, because obviously I moved away just as lockdown happened. So, you know, he was very much at home on his own, and his brother was living away from home. So it affected him. And then I realised that actually, you know, mental health is actually something that you need to be, you know, you need to be aware of. But you know, overall, you know, I'd met my partner. You know, she's an open water swimmer. Very, very supportive of the sport. You know, of cycling. She actually comes into work with me as well on the odd occasion. So it's nice to share that sort of interest. You know, I'm not a great lover of cold water. Even though I've been in irrigation for that long, but yeah, you know, we came back off of a holiday in sort of August last year, and we'd swum Loch Lomond. You know, we're done. You know, it was a different. It's a total change to my lifestyle, and I've got my life back. You know, which is, you know, it seems a strange thing, but I've got the balance back that I wanted. And the only thing, obviously, because I live sort of 45, 50 miles away from my boys, that's the only thing since really lockdown that I haven't quite ticked that box of seeing them enough on a regular basis. So yeah, but overall, Stuart, you know, I'm in a great place. I really am, you know, and
I mean, and you look at, people might be listening to this and not seeing it, but I will just, you know, if you are listening, Paul is looking fit, healthy, and he is smiling. He's a head greenkeeper, so he has a certain amount of the weight of the world on his shoulders. They all do, but he looks very good for it. Let's just finish then, Paul. You mentioned that you sort of want to try and spend work on a little bit of time with your boys. They're 18 and 21, I think. So they might not want to see their dad all that much,
but for various reasons.
I've got your list of. So I asked you to sort of, where do you see yourself in a year's time, or what's the plan for the next year? You've sort of written here that you're going to have a holiday overseas. You're going to head out to the States. Is that booked? Is it, Paul, or are you going to plan that?
No, that's all booked. So that happened 3 years ago, and obviously through COVID that kept getting put off.
So it's a COVID delayed holiday.
Yeah, so we're flying into Vegas for literally the afternoon, picking the car up, and then we're going to do all the national parks. So we're going Zion, all the way over to Moab, and then doing North and South Rim, before ending up in Flagstaff and then back to Vegas. I think it's 15 days in total we've got.
Wow.
So And then I get criticised because I'm not a great lover of the sun. So there's me going over there like, yeah, I'll be all right. Well, how hot's it over there?
I've accidentally fallen into a little bit of an American market with the podcast in recent times, so I'll have to get you to hook me some guests up. And I've got my youngest brother moved to North Carolina about 8 months ago. He's loving it over there, and I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time there.
Well, I've never been to America, Stu.
I never have. I've
done, it's interesting.
Done Australia and done ski seasons and lived.
I've done Canada. I've done Canada for 24 hours, but bar that, I've never done America. So
wow. Well, we wish you all the best on that trip. I think, Paul, this has been a fantastic chat. We've sort of got to about our time limit, really.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Stuart.
I just want to thank you for coming on. It takes a lot. I say it with anyone who comes on, anyone who's willing to come on here and talk about, the times in their life that weren't quite so good and the changes they wanted to make and the changes that they have made and the journey along the way. It's very brave. And I appreciate that. And I hope that, now being both in the Southeast, I hope we can hopefully create a little podcast. I think there's a gap in the market to create a little podcast for head greenkeepers. And I'd like to get some apprentices on. I spoke to a golf pro yesterday. So anyone who's watching or listening to this, my email or the podcast email is HWOM, if you want to come on and have a chat. There's many issues in the industry, good and bad ones. We heard Paul mentioned, carbendazine, it went 3 or 4 years ago, didn't it? And we know the havoc that worm casts are causing. If you want to come on and discuss anything like that, I'm not particularly technically minded, but if you want to come on and discuss, anything with me, greenkeeping related, I can read a book, I can research, and if not, I can certainly drop people like Paul a message and they can point me in the right direction. Don't forget, we've got the Buy Me a Coffee set up. Just log on to that if you want to make a small donation. And please like, rate, and review the show. Paul Kennedy, thank you so much for being a guest on Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast. It's been brilliant hooking up with you again. From what has to be said, I slipped into your DMs. Is that what all the kids say? Slid in there.
If that's the right thing to say, yeah.
Yeah. And you were very kind enough to come on and have a chat. Yeah. It's been thoroughly enjoyable. We will stay in touch, Paul, and I can imagine you will come on and be a guest, hopefully again in the future.
I will. For an
Paul
update,
Kennedy, thank you for joining me.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Stuart. Goodbye.